Jared, my man, it's been a while. Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, Senior Fellow and CNBC contributor, and Connecticut State Representative Chris Davis. And first, I have a question for Robert Frank. Now, this list, does it include Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and Florida Senator Rick Scott and Texas Governor? Does it include any of those guys from states where there's lower taxes?
They are wealthy Connecticut residents.
They live for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I just wondered whether this was like a stalking horse for guys who could
who are benefiting from Connecticut's higher taxes.
Have any of the 20 offered to write a check?
They have not.
They have not. They have not. Okay, that's interesting. Anyway, Jared, I do want to start with you because I know what you're going to say, that there's no evidence that this causes people to move, but I mean, I know for a fact Paul Tudor Jones moved, and he's got enough money to where, if you do the math, that comes out to millions, right? Barry Sternlicht, I know that he's moved. That will come out to millions. Who else? Chris?
Thomas Petterfree.
How much is he worth?
You can definitely... About $20 billion, I believe.
20 billion. So, Jared, my only problem is, are you sure that you don't end up, when you do this, with a lower actual number that you collect just based on the virtue that you feel for proposing it? And are you sure you're not cutting off your nose despite your face?
That's a risk. This is economics, so there's never certainty, never 100% certainty. As you said, the literature on this, and it's a deep economic literature, there's been lots of state tax increases, so you can look at this across the country, is quite solidly finding that you don't get this kind of flight of folks when top tax rates go up. And in fact, you know, we've had millionaire tax increases in about 8 states, and in 6 of those 8 states, growth, jobs, income have gone up. We haven't seen revenues have gone up. We haven't seen the kind of exodus. But you're right to raise that as a concern. And Connecticut, in particular, has had less positive outcomes with some recent tax increases. So, I think there are both sides of the argument here. What I like about where these folks who wrote the letter are coming from is they themselves are telling you, we're going to stay here. And remember, they're representative of what's characteristic about this state, which is it is a very highly unequal state with a really high level of accumulated wealth at the top of the scale. It's the 3rd largest number of hedge funds in any state. It's it's the highest per capita income in the country, I believe. I take them at their word.
I can find 20 people that want to go back to the gold. I can find 20 people in Connecticut that have ideas that are so outlandish and ridiculous, and I just don't see why. Okay. The virtue signaling, and we'll promote it, and we'll talk about it, and oh my God, they're rich and they want to pay more. Who would have thought? I mean, it's so tired and old.
And Jared, you're absolutely right about the level of inequality in Connecticut, but that's the issue for taxes. So in most states like Connecticut, New York, the top 1% pay 40% of the income taxes. But when you break that down even further, it's probably 10 guys in Connecticut, all of them hedge fund guys, who probably pay a disproportionate share of that. So if any of them leave, as we saw with Tepper in New Jersey, that becomes a problem.
No question. And again, I mean, Connecticut is a state that when you line up states that have raised their taxes and you look at their outcomes, Connecticut hasn't been at the top of that list.
Yeah, but then you got SALT in there. So you're saying, well, the studies show that with tax increases that we haven't seen much change in the wealthy leaving the states. But it's a matter of degree, because when you add in the SALT, you add in going from 6.9 to 9%, there is a level at which the wealthy say, okay, enough is enough.
Yeah, no, so here's the question. I don't think anyone who's seriously looking at Connecticut's fiscal situation is saying we don't need to raise any revenues at all. So my question to you is, if you're not going to get it from those who have benefited far the most, in fact, you said it yourself, virtually all of the growth over this recovery has gone to those folks in the top 1%. Connecticut already has a regressive tax system. Taxes paid by middle and low-income people in Connecticut are 50% higher than those at the top. So you tell me, where are you going to get the revenue?
Let's bring Chris in. I mean, Chris, I don't even think Lamont, I mean, even he has figured out this might not be a great idea, right?
Well, I think it sends a terrible signal to those who do pay the most in the state of Connecticut. And to counter Jared's point, our own Department of Revenue Services commissioner just a couple of years ago said that they have a team within the department that looks at the filings from the top 100 taxpayers in Connecticut, and they track it, and they try to keep track of whether or not they're paying as much as they did in taxes before, because the impact of just one or two of those individuals leaving the state of Connecticut can sink our budget as we move forward throughout a fiscal year. And in fact, they actually sent out an intervention team and tried to stop individuals from leaving the state of Connecticut, and they still did it anyway. The state couldn't even offer what they were looking for.
So address my question. If you're not going to get it from those at the top of the scale, where are you going to get more revenues in a state where you already have a tax system that's tilted against middle and low-income taxpayers?
Well, the question isn't about getting more revenue. The question is about finding ways to cut spending and reduce that spending.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is, because Connecticut's revenue continues to grow year after year after year to the point that you made previously. Yet our spending continues to grow at astronomical rates. And the ability for the individuals at the top to pay, yes, they have the ability to do it. But I'm more concerned about the individuals that are in the middle class that do not have that ability to pay day in and day out.
I agree with you.
Sales tax increases, tolls to the tune of $1 billion, and situations where those individuals can't pay. And if those high-income earners leave, those are the types of cuts to those services for those individuals that are necessary. So
look,
we continue to raise those taxes, Jared.
We
continue to raise their taxes. They are going to leave the state of Connecticut, and they're going to leave us behind.
We agree about not raising taxes on middle and low-income folks in Connecticut. What we disagree on is this notion that you can get where you need to go through cutting spending. Connecticut's debt burden, its pension obligations are just too high for that. And in fact, if you look at the debate in Connecticut, it's not about whether we're going to raise taxes or not. It's about who we're going to raise taxes on. Taxes have to go up there to some extent. Sure, spending cuts should be in the mix, but there will be revenue increases. And it is, I think we both agree that it is just deeply unfair to consider raising taxes on middle, low-income people. We're going to have to raise them on those at the top. Now, if you don't like what this group of millionaires and billionaires are suggesting, there is a proposal on the table to slightly raise capital gains rates in Connecticut by 2%. That's found to be particularly innocuous in terms of hurting growth or generating exodus. Maybe that's a kind of a compromise position here.
No, I don't think it's a compromise at all. I mean, you're going to find these individuals that are paying at higher capital gains rates, and Connecticut would be the only state that taxes puts a surcharge on long-term capital gains as well. So you'd be hitting entrepreneurs, business owners that have built up business assets that employ people across the state of Connecticut, hit them with a surcharge if they were to
all I hear is no from
to
you.
leave.
All I hear is no, nothing. We're not going to do it, and I just think that's very unrealistic. I think you've got to come up with something that's better than we're just going to cut spending.
Well, Jared, let's talk about why that spending went up. That spending went up because of those fixed costs went up, because of long-term union contracts that have been put into place through negotiations in the executive branch and not the ability to do it through statute as in almost every single other state in the country.
Fair point.
We had explosion in debt service payments over the last 10 years because of reckless and irresponsible borrowing on part of the executive branch. So those are the types of things that we need to be taking on and trying to go after before we even ask for a single another dollar from the residents of the state of Connecticut.
Yeah, again, to me, that's just log rolling. I mean, yes, you've well described the spending pressures, and there's just no flexibility there. So you have pension obligations that you have to meet. Now, you're either going to raise taxes on people who are already paying a disproportionate share relative to their incomes, or you're going to have to raise taxes on those at the higher end of the scale. And I just think that this idea of like waving your hands and saying we're just going to cut spending is not responsible fiscal leadership.
Well, why don't we work on trying to grow the economy so that we don't necessarily have to raise taxes, but we raise the tax base so that we have more people paying into it. And the only way that we do that is by sending that signal to those people that employ people in the state of Connecticut, and raising their taxes sends them the signal to get the heck out of town.
Okay, so that's
what we don't want to do.
That's an interesting proposal. It's always good if you can broaden the base.